Welcome to the latest Motley Fool scoreboard. I'm on in Chocobaloo, and we've got longtime fools Dan Kaplinger and Jason Hall giving a 1 to 10 rating to a security company that perhaps got more interesting after an outage this past summer. CrowdStrike, ticker symbol CRWD. We'll do the business first, including factors like industry and competition. A 10 is invincible. A 1 is hopeless. Jason's going with an 8.5 to be just half a point better than Dan Kaplinger. We'll start with Dan.
You know, CrowdStrike cybersecurity specialist has done a really good job with its Falcon platform to protect its clients, build up a strong ecosystem network. My score, you know, a lot of cybersecurity companies, they really would have taken a huge hit after an outage the size of what happened with the download for Microsoft Windows-based systems that led to outages at major airports, a whole bunch of infrastructure, some medical facilities, hospitals. You might have thought that would be cataclysmic. It did send the stock down briefly, but boy, the company managed to navigate its way through that high publicity negative event, emerge almost unscathed. And that just tells you how important cybersecurity is and what a good job CrowdStrike is doing with it.
Yeah, the difference in my score and Dan's score is that I'm 0.5 more optimistic about the world than Dan. We had the same score directionally. Here's the bottom line. You look at the numbers and they don't lie. The revenue growth is still very, very good. Still growing faster than its smaller kind of upstart competitor there. Existing customers are sticking around and growing their spend. There's a little hiccup I'll talk about later with net new acquisition, but I think if you look at what its existing customers doing, that really says a lot about how strong this business is.
See, I rate Jason like a 9 on optimism. Dan, maybe a 4. So I don't know about that 0.5. I think you missed a decimal place. Management. A 10 is Warren Buffett. A 1 is Homer Simpson. Jason's got a 9. Dan's less optimistic with a strong 8. Go ahead, Dan.
Hey, 8's optimistic from me. You got a really strong founder in George Kurtz. We like founder-run businesses. He's well regarded for his experience and his knowledge in the cybersecurity space. And again, can't give him enough kudos for being able to handle a highly adverse event with skill and adroitly dealing with the situation.
Yeah, Dan's 8 might be like a 12 for me. It's a very, very high score. You learn a lot about people during crisis. And George Kurtz has been one of my favorite founder leaders for a long time. But not only did he and other executives in the business too say the right things, but if you look at the results, they apparently did the right things too. Not every visionary that has an idea for a business like CrowdStrike can found it, take it public and grow it, and then make the transition to a more mature business. But Kurtz is really proving his mettle.
Financials, a 10 is a fortress, a 1 is yikes. Jason's at an 8, Dan's at a 7. Go with Jason this time.
I wanted to go higher, but I'm trying to moderate myself a little bit here. The balance sheet is exceptionally strong. There's no debt, tons and tons of cash. Cash flows are growing. We're seeing operating leverage kick in where earnings and cash flows are growing faster than revenue. Those are things that you love to see. And over the long term, those are the things that create value. This is important too with these tech companies thinking about the impact of stock-based compensation. Free cash flow is larger than stock-based compensation. It's growing a lot faster. And as a result, the business is creating value for individual shareholders, and dilution, share count's only up less than 2% over the past year. So it's probably a smaller problem than a lot of investors might think.
Yeah, you're having the usual slowdown in revenue growth just because the really crazy revenue growth figures that you had earlier in the company's history, unsustainable just from a mathematical standpoint. I, like Jason, like how CrowdStrike is doing that transition away from sort of a revenue growth at all costs concept towards emphasizing profitability. We have reached GAAP profitability. I think that continues to move up from there. It's a firmly established large cap stock. I think it's a mature business that you're going to have to start treating that way. That's why my score is a little bit less, but it's still very strong.
Valuation, Dan, how well will CrowdStrike stock do over the next 5 years, and how safe is it? You mind a 10 is a sure thing, a 1 is a lottery ticket.
Gave CrowdStrike a 5 to 10% average annual return over the next 5 years, safety score of 6. That's pretty much par for the course for my market call generally. Stock already basically has recovered from the update incident over the summer. Not quite back up to all-time highs just yet, but getting closer to that. I don't see any easy money left there. Cybersecurity is going to be a strong business going forward, in line with what I see the market performing over the next 5 years.
Yeah, so Dan and I both had a 6 for safety score, and my optimism, again, a little bit higher expectations for returns, 10 to 15%. I could prove both too low on my safety score, but maybe too high on my expected returns. But here's my case for those expected returns, 10 to 15%. This is an expensive stock and it's too rich. Dan, you're right. It's the multiple needs to come down because it is a more mature business. But I mean, I think even if it grows free cash flow 25% a year over the next 5 years, that would triple free cash flow. We could see the multiple come down a lot and still get better than 10% a year in returns. And I think even with declining growth rates, 25% a year free cash flow growth over the next 5 years is probably not too high of an expectation. It could do even better than that.
It's everyone's favorite topic. Jason, is there a company in CrowdStrike space you like more?
There's definitely not a company or business that I like better, but I think investors should be thinking about SentinelOne maybe as the Pepsi to its Coke. Actually, Pepsi's been the better investment over the past 25 years, but it's a fraction of the size. It's cash flow positive now. It's growing at similar rates. So we think about CrowdStrike a few years ago hitting that inflection point. We're seeing the same thing happen with SentinelOne. Enterprise security is massive. And I think we might see multiple winners in endpoint security. SentinelOne's half the valuation of CrowdStrike. It's cheaper than CrowdStrike has ever been on a sales multiple.
Yeah, I just see the cybersecurity industry, generally the stocks, as being highly valued, fully valued, in my opinion. I don't really have, there's other companies that are in the business that also do a good job. I don't see them as superior to CrowdStrike.
Thank you to both Dan and to Jason. They're giving CrowdStrike a solid overall score of 7.3 out of 10, short of the 8.7 it got last time with Jason and his fellow optimist Jeff Santoro. Chalk that up to swapping Jeff with Dan, and also to the summer's outage. For what it's worth, I bought shares due to the 8.0 or higher score back in the original one, and then I bought some more shares over the summer when it fell due to the outage. Look out for it, and they've done pretty well actually. Look out for a new scoreboard every market day at 7 p.m. Eastern. Next up is Apple. Till then, Fool on.
The big readjustment a couple, 3 years ago or 5, however, I mean, time has no meaning after COVID.